All right, folks, welcome to another deep dive. Today, we're tackling something that's been all over the news lately, and that's bound to pop up on the UPSC exams.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's the whole freebie debate in Indian politics.
Yeah, exactly. And we've got two really interesting sources to help us unpack this whole thing. An article from The Hindu and a report from the Observer Research Foundation.
Both really thought-provoking, especially for those of you gearing up for the prelims and mains.
Definitely. Now, this whole debate kind of kicked off when Prime Minister Modi started talking about this Ravati culture, basically saying that all these giveaways by political parties are, well, a bit of a problem.
Yeah, it raises this really fundamental question about where's the line, between supporting citizens, which is of course crucial,
Yeah.
and what some people might call just buying votes.
Right. It's tricky, too, because there isn't really a clear definition of what actually is a freebie. I mean, the Hindu article mentions things like free electricity and cash handouts as possible examples.
Right. Contrasting them with more established welfare programs like, subsidized food or healthcare.
Yeah, and that's where things get a bit murky. The Hindu piece even brings up this interesting example of providing bicycles for girls so they can get to school.
Right. Is that a freebie or is it a crucial tool to help girls get an education? It's a gray area for sure.
Totally. And it makes you think about the intent behind these policies and, what kind of impact are they really having?
Absolutely.
I mean,
Yeah.
just look at the recent Delhi Assembly elections. All the major parties, AAP, BJP, Congress, they were all promising a whole bunch of freebies to try and win over voters.
Yeah, and that's exactly what's got the Supreme Court a little worried. They've been trying to figure out how to deal with this whole freebie issue for years.
They even had a ruling back in 2013 saying that while freebies might influence voters, they don't technically count as bribery.
Right. But just recently, they've decided to refer the whole issue to a larger bench, which kind of shows how seriously they're taking this.
Yeah, it definitely signals some concern about the impact this could have on having free and fair elections.
It's a really complex issue, and
Yeah.
I think to understand it properly, we need to look at the historical context. India has a long tradition of welfarism going all the way back to the five-year plans and even the directive principles of the Constitution.
So it's not just some new trend that's popped up. It's been part of the system for a while.
Exactly. Over the decades, both the central government and individual states have implemented tons of different programs aimed at supporting the most vulnerable people in society. It's a really fundamental part of India's social fabric.
But this is the key question that the Hindu article asks. Are these freebies actually empowering people, or are they just like a temporary fix when what we really need is strong economic development?
That's a crucial question. It gets right to the heart of the issue.
Yeah, and I'd love to hear what our listeners think about this. So if you're listening, drop a comment below and tell us what you think. Where do you draw the line between necessary support and, just giveaways?
It's a question that policymakers are wrestling with as well, trying to balance providing essential support while also being responsible with economic management.
And speaking of economic management, the Reserve Bank of India has been raising some red flags about the impact of all these subsidies on government finances.
Their 2022 report was pretty stark, wasn't it? They're worried about states racking up huge debts and not having enough money to invest in important things like infrastructure.
Yeah. The Hindu article outlined some pretty serious potential consequences, too, like increased state debt, less investment in infrastructure, and even the possibility of higher taxes down the road.
Right. These are all things that could have a big impact on India's economic future.
And it's not just some, theoretical thing. The Hindu article talks about Delhi, where the revenue surplus has really gone down because of how much they're spending on freebies.
Oh, yeah.
And we're seeing this in other states, too, which makes you wonder about whether this can really last in the long term.
It's a tough situation. On the one hand, you want to help people and meet their needs right now. But then there's also the bigger picture, the long-term health of the economy and making sure states can invest in future growth.
So where do we go from here? Both the Hindu and the ORF report have some ideas about possible solutions. They both mention needing tighter rules and making sure that these programs are more focused and efficient. It's not about getting rid of support altogether, but making sure it gets to the people who need it the most.
Yeah, one of the key things they talk about is needing to reform institutions.
Right.
We need better ways to track how these subsidies are being used and making sure things are transparent and accountable both at the central level and in the states.
And then there's the FRBM Act, the Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act.
Yeah.
That's been around since 2003, but maybe it needs to be strengthened. I mean, if we're serious about keeping government finances in check, enforcing this law more strictly, could really make a difference.
Right. It basically sets limits on how much the government can borrow and spend to make sure things are stable financially.
Yeah, it gives a framework for managing things responsibly. And within that framework, we need to prioritize programs that are really targeted.
Hmm.
Instead of these broad universal handouts, we should focus on initiatives that address specific problems and vulnerabilities, like, direct benefit transfers. DBT has been successful in other areas.
Oh, absolutely. DBT has been a game changer. I mean, by
Mhm.
sending money straight to people's accounts, we've cut down on a lot of the waste and corruption that you used to see with these older welfare programs.
Right. And if we could use that same approach in other areas, it could be a win-win.
Definitely. And technology can play a big role here in making things more efficient and making sure that help reaches those who need it. But, stepping back for a second, we need to remember the bigger picture. Ultimately, the best solutions come from having a strong economy.
So it's about more than just giving handouts. It's about empowering people.
Exactly. We need to focus on creating more jobs, investing in skill development, and really supporting key areas like education, healthcare, and agriculture. If we can help people escape poverty by giving them economic opportunities, they'll naturally rely less on subsidies. It's all about investing in people and creating an economy that's dynamic and inclusive.
It's like that saying, give a man a fish and you feed him for a day. Teach a man to fish and you feed him for a lifetime. That's the kind of thinking we need in this debate. And I think that's a really important point for our listeners, especially those studying for the UPSC. It's not just about understanding the different sides of this issue, but about being able to explain those long-term solutions.
And that's where the directive principles of state policy are so relevant. They don't just talk about providing for basic needs, they also emphasize the importance of having a society that's fair and just where everyone has a chance to thrive. So it's not just about immediate relief, it's about creating an environment where people can make progress in the long run.
That brings us back to those Delhi elections we were talking about. It's easy to criticize politicians for using freebies to get votes. But, it's the voters who are asking for them. What does that tell us about the situation people are facing?
That's a great point. It suggests that there's something deeper going on in society. Maybe people have lost faith in how slowly the economy is growing and they're willing to accept these short-term solutions.
Or maybe they feel like they're being left behind and this is the only way for them to benefit from economic growth.
Mm.
It's a complex issue, and it shows that we need policies that are more inclusive, policies that tackle the root causes of inequality and make sure everyone feels like they have a stake in the future.
Exactly. And that's why we need to move past these overly simple solutions and have a more nuanced discussion. A discussion that involves everyone, the government, civil society, the private sector, and most importantly, the citizens themselves. It's about finding solutions that work for everyone, not just a select few.
So before we finish this part of the discussion, are there any other important points from these articles that we haven't talked about yet? What really stood out to you?
One thing that I found really interesting was how the Hindu article warned about what could happen if we don't control spending on freebies. They highlighted the dangers of rising state debt, less investment in important infrastructure, and ultimately slower economic growth. It's a warning we should take seriously.
It's like we're sacrificing long-term prosperity for short-term gains. And that's not just some abstract economic idea. It has real consequences for people's lives. If the economy struggles, everyone suffers.
Exactly. And it's often the poorest and most vulnerable people who are hit the hardest. It's a vicious cycle that we need to break.
It's like we're just delaying the problem and hoping it'll go away. But as future UPSC officers, you need to be able to see through those kinds of short-sighted solutions. It's about understanding the long-term effects of policy decisions and advocating for development strategies that are sustainable and inclusive.
Absolutely. And that's why it's so important to look at lots of different sources of information. Don't just rely on one newspaper or one think tank. Read widely, compare different viewpoints, and form your own informed opinions. That's how you'll ace those UPSC exams and, even more importantly, become effective and ethical leaders.
Exactly. And for our listeners who want to dig deeper into this topic, we really recommend checking out the full articles from the Hindu and ORF. We'll put the links in the show notes. And we always love hearing from you, so feel free to leave a comment and share your thoughts on this debate. What are your ideas for balancing welfare and fiscal responsibility? What solutions do you think are the best? Let's keep this conversation going.
One thing that really jumped out at me from both the Hindu and that ORF report was how they both talked about the need for like a fundamental shift in how we think about development in India.
Yeah.
It's not just about handing out free stuff, but about creating a society that's fair and sustainable for everyone. Absolutely. I think that's a key point. You don't want to create a situation where people become dependent on handouts. The goal is to empower people to be self-sufficient.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's about tackling the underlying causes of poverty and inequality, not just treating the symptoms.
Right.
And that means thinking long term,
Hmm.
investing in things like education, healthcare, good infrastructure, and making sure businesses can grow and create jobs.
Right. We need to build a future where everyone has a real chance to succeed no matter where they come from.
And that's where good governance comes in. We
Yeah.
need leaders who are genuinely committed to serving the people,
Mm.
not just focused on their own political careers.
Yeah.
We need transparency, accountability, and effective policies.
Yeah.
Policies that actually get implemented properly.
Absolutely.
It's not enough to just throw money at the problem.
Mm.
We need to create a system that actually works for everyone.
Exactly. And that's going to take a collective effort. It's not just on the government. It's
Yeah.
on civil society, the private sector, and citizens, too.
Yeah.
We all need to work together.
It's about changing our mindset. Moving away from this idea that we're entitled to things and instead embracing a sense of responsibility.
I think that's a really important point.
We all have rights, but with those rights come responsibilities. We all have a part to play in building a better future for India.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with something to think about. How can India achieve growth that's both sustainable and inclusive without falling into this trap of unsustainable populism?
That is the big question, isn't it? And it's something that all of you as future leaders are going to have to grapple with. So keep thinking critically, keep questioning, and keep striving for a better India.
Remember, there's no easy answers to these questions. But by having these tough conversations and looking at things from different perspectives, we can start to find solutions that work for everyone.
And don't forget to like and subscribe to The Deep Dive for more in-depth discussions on current affairs. And be sure to check out the full articles from the Hindu and the ORF. We'll link to them in the show notes. They're a great starting point for anyone who wants to explore this topic further. Until next time, happy studying.
And we'd love to hear your thoughts, especially from those of you preparing for the UPSC exams. This whole freebie debate is a great topic for an essay. So drop us a comment below and let us know what you think. What are your ideas for balancing welfare and fiscal responsibility? Let's keep the conversation going.